Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast, and this week I'm talking to activist, artist, and photographer Benjamin von Wong. Ben's work is probably best described as epic, ranging from his earlier photography work which had him collaborating with amazing subjects around the world, to his latest installation work building incredible sculptures and artworks from unusual objects, that hope to provoke and motivate people to take action on issues like recycling, child hunger, and of course our oceans. Whilst not a full-time underwater photographer, Ben has created some incredible imagery with very little experience, and his journey from playing in a pool with friends to tying models to shipwrecks is really inspiring. Ben also has his own podcast called Impact Everywhere, all about creating a positive impact in unexpected places. Alright, let's dive in. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you at the moment? Because you live in San Francisco, but I'm pretty sure you've been quarantined somewhere.
Actually, my plan this year was to go nomadic. So I had gotten rid of my place in San Francisco and had just begun my journey when the coronavirus situation hit. And so now I am back home in the room I went to university in Montreal, living with my parents.
Oh, nice. So
Yeah.
some memories there.
Yeah. So on one side, I feel super grateful because I have a place I can hunker down. I could stay here indefinitely. I have, healthy parents. I have food. I have lodging. And on the other side, it's like, well, this wasn't the plan.
Yeah. Especially if you were going to be nomadic for a year, where were you going to go? What was your kind of plan for that?
Well, I've never been able to plan my life, which is what makes this current quarantine situation so interesting. Like I have literally not known where I was going to be a couple months out for the last 6, 7, 8 years, basically ever since I quit my day job, because I've always just gone with the flow. Depending on what came up, I would go there. Projects, meetings, conferences, any kind of opportunity, I would hop on a plane and just go do that. And now suddenly it's like, oh, well, I guess I know exactly where I'm going to be for the next couple weeks and months, maybe. Yeah. What am I going to do? Like, and it's just been so weird. Like I've had to learn routines, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think for people who know your work and have kind of followed you over the years, you are like a bit of a hummingbird where you're always somewhere different. You're always doing a project that's very different and inspiring. And there's always a lot of energy to it. And there's always a lot of, you're very front and center of your own work. You're kind of your own front man. And I feel like this quarantine is kind of like a caged bird a little bit, where I feel bad for you. I feel bad that you're kind of stuck in this little kind of room above your mum's garage or wherever you are.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I think that, yes, when you think about it, when you look at my projects, I am front and center of my projects because I am the director, the actor, the creator, the strategist, the person launching the thing, the influencer. Like I kind of play the role of every single piece of the puzzle. And so when you see a project that I've directed or been a part of, I'm such a dominant part of the story. And for the projects in which I play kind of a background role, you just never hear about it because then it doesn't become relevant to what people expect of me. And so although the public perception of me going around and doing projects is true, it is actually a very small part of what I do. Most of the work that I do is sitting in front of a computer and having conversations with people and answering emails and planning and thinking and designing new ideas and trying to cross-pollinate ideas between industries in order to come up with these different concepts. So it's much more project management and planning and strategy than it is actually executing. But the fun part is the execution. That's where you get the stories, the videos, the photos. And so that's the part that people really gravitate towards. So I think the challenge with being quarantined is less so the fact that I can't do anything, but it's that I have nothing to talk about. Because although I think what I'm doing is interesting, it isn't shareable. And I think that dissociation is a little bit tough, particularly in a time where I had kind of made all these different announcements slash plans to adapt to this new nomadic lifestyle. So that's all.
Yeah. So things have been derailed a little bit. I mean, you are a kind of a chameleon. Like you tend to change and kind of react to your environment from
Yeah.
the outside anyway. Are you finding new ways to kind of be creative and get that kind of scratch that itch while you're in quarantine?
I guess while I was going nomadic, I realized that one of the things that I really loved doing was having deep, interesting conversations with people. And that led,
Yeah.
how might I operationalize this ability to have conversations with people? Is there a way to do this more regularly? And so I kind of landed upon the idea of a podcast that could be a really interesting medium, because if I was going to be having conversations with people anyways, I might as well record it, might as well put it somewhere so that others could get access to it. And then along the way, that would also drive and feed the kinds of people that I would be meeting along the way. So I think currently, between the podcast, a little Facebook group that I started around the podcast, a webinar series that I've been hosting around the podcast and the group, as well as like a side project that I've been working on called The Other Heroes, to find the other heroes of the COVID-19 fight as just a desire to make a difference. I kind of feel like I'm trying a lot of new things that I've never done before and expending a lot of energy, but not getting very far. And so the best analogy that I might have for that is I'm on a rocking chair right now trying to run a marathon, and I just keep rocking really, really hard, but I'm not going really, really far. And
Right.
it's a really frustrating feeling. So I think a lot of people may be in that boat, but I'm feeling particularly paralyzed by it right now.
Yeah, I mean, because you're someone who wants to run, right? You want to be sort of feeling the wind in your hair, and at the moment, it's kind of pretty static.
Yeah, I think I get motivated by momentum. And so I'm totally fine doing the work, but I need to feel the progress. And if it feels like I'm just moving in place for too long, I lose steam really, really quickly. So the feedback loop is quite important for me. I think that's why I really enjoyed. So my approach with projects has always been spontaneously land in a situation that I have no idea, I've never been in before. Build a foundation around it, find the followers or the key people who are going to help you make the project happen, and then just, like a whirlwind, just make something happen within the couple weeks that you happen to be in a place. Like drum up all the excitement and the intensity of just being there and making things happen is something that I find particularly exhilarating. It doesn't work so well online.
No, because do you find that the physical aspect of you actually being in the place, is that more of it helps you to get the motivation, or do you think that people are more interested when they're like, oh, he's local to me, let's go and get involved?
I think maybe it's a little bit of both, right? Online, there's no sense of time constraint. You don't feel that this is an opportunity that's going to disappear within a certain time frame. So the pressure is on. Whereas when you're physically there, like, I mean, if you go to the Bahamas and you're doing a photo shoot and you're looking for models and you only have 2 days to look for these models, that's like, people are going to show up and they're going to move their plans and they're going to make time for you. But if you say, hey, I'd like you on my podcast, and they're like, oh yeah, what about in 3 weeks? I'll have a window of an hour then. And it's just like, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, there's no sense of urgency.
No, not at all. Not at all. It just isn't there.
No, and it's amazing how much you can let yourself get away with online. I mean, in terms of stretching deadlines.
Yeah.
Because, because it's like, well, actually, I can do tomorrow. Would tomorrow be a bit better? Yeah, let's do it then.
Yeah, I mean, online works really well for people who love schedules and routine. Like, if every Monday you're going to do this thing, and every Wednesday you're going to do that thing, and every Friday you're going to do this other thing, and you're just going to be consistent and be steady and be predictable. Like, I think it's amazing. And so for certain types of people, I think it works really well. And for me, a little less so, because I've always been project to project based. I basically have the attention span of a hedgehog, and I can like dive into something really deep for about a month, and then I'm like, okay, I'm done.
yeah, totally. I'm kind of the same way, where I'm so easily distracted by a new shiny thing that the online thing there's too many shiny things. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Tell me about your very first underwater photo shoot.
So my very first underwater shoot, well, how small do you want to get? Like swimming pool small?
Sure. Yeah. The first time you went underwater and took photos.
Yeah. So the first time I went underwater and took photos, I think was just in a swimming pool. I had found one of those decapacks, the standard, really sketchy plastic bag that you never want to put your camera in.
Yeah, like the glorified Ziploc bag.
Yeah, so I think it was my girlfriend at the time and some friends. We just went in a swimming pool and took some photos, and I was like, okay, well, that was interesting. Didn't really go anywhere. Fast forward a little bit. I think I tried doing an overwater photo shoot where we put models in an indoor swimming pool and I put the camera on a crane,
Yeah.
like a jib, and tried to take pictures from above. And then during that shoot or close to that shoot, I think we just might have done a couple underwater shots just for fun.
Was that shoot the UV light one?
Yeah. It's the UV light one. So we basically painted people in UV paint and then suspended on UV lights all over the place and just tried to take pictures. So I did that, and then, but I think maybe the first substantial underwater production that I was a part of was this thing called the Underwater Realm. I'd basically stumbled across Dave Reynolds, who was a young filmmaker down in the UK who was working on the first ever short film that was fully shot underwater. And he had crowdfunded over $100,000 for it. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. So I reached out and I said, hey, I'm planning on traveling through Europe. Any chance I could come by and take some photographs for you guys? And he said, sure. And so I just ended up there. I had no gear of my own. I didn't have a proper underwater housing. I just had one of those plastic bags. And so they lent me a camera, one of their 5D Mark IIs. I managed to sync up an underwater strobe with surface strobes. So I just daisy chained a bunch of speed lights so that it would flash underwater, which would trigger us, which would be pointing upwards towards a surface light, which would be triggering some backlights to create these rays of light coming through the swimming pool. So I think that was like my first kind of like experience doing something a little bit more produced underwater. And they had already set up all the divers and the models and all that stuff. And so, I kind of just swooped in on their set and then created something with what I had available. And it was a really cool experience. But that was it. Like, that was like my first, I guess, real thing. And the next level up from there was this completely crazy project I did in Bali, which I think on paper, and even today when I think back to it, like, there's no reason why it should have succeeded. It just happened to succeed. Long story short, I found out that I was going, or my parents were dragging me on vacation to Bali, and I found out there was a shipwreck, and I was like, oh, there's a shipwreck. I need to do a photo shoot. And so I didn't have my dive certification at the time. So we landed there. I was already planning a photo shoot, even though I didn't have my dive certification. I got hooked up with a dive master called Chris Simanjuntak, who was just like, you want to do an underwater photo shoot, but you've never dived before properly? And I was like, yep, right. Let's do it. And so once again, there's no reason why this should have worked, but because he took a chance, I'd shown him my like surface work, which I guess was very fantastical and looked really interesting. And so he was just like, all right, let's give it a shot. He did a lot of the production on it, found his makeup artist, dresses. I wasn't even sure we could find dresses. The plan was to cut up used bed sheets and have those as dresses was the original plan, because I had no clothes when I landed. But somehow it all came together. Oh, the camera that I was planning on using was a Nikon point and shoot. I just like one of those underwater point and shoots. I could go 30 meters deep, but I flooded it on like the first day of scouting.
Oh, shit.
So then I ended up using the camera of someone else that was there, and I opted for the cheaper camera that was available. There was a Nikon D90 or a 5D Mark II, and I chose the D90 because I wanted the photo shoot to be as relatable as possible. And yeah, for 2 days, we did way too many dives, and I had I think, yeah, some of the best models I could have ever asked for. They had like 3.5 minute breath hold, 30 meters underwater in current with a dive support team of 4. And all we had to do was pay their costs and food and the air tanks. And it was just kind of the most phenomenal thing. And someone flew in from Singapore to document it for free. I'd done a workshop in Singapore before, and he flew in, and it was just one of those things where, once again, so many things had to go right for this to work, and somehow it did. And ultimately this thing went viral. Like, it was trending on Facebook back when Facebook still had trending. And I think really put me on the map as like, oh, this guy is an underwater photographer. And I was like, wow, that was the first time I've really done a proper underwater shoot.
Yeah, I remember seeing that come out. I remember because I was deep in the underwater kind of realm then too. And I just remember seeing those photos and going, oh man, that's so good.
But I think what made it good was my editing, because most underwater photographers or used to be like quite purists, right? Because most underwater photographers were closer to documentary photographers, right? They would go and document the wildlife and so forth, not do something really crazy and produced. And so what I did was just go in and whiten out the dresses and I had this and make sure that the skin tones were a normal skin tone instead of the blue that you would have. So I just recolored skin and whitened the dress, and
Yeah.
that made everything look super painterly and super magical. And I think that editing combined with the audacity of the idea and the catchiness of the headline, plus the fact that it was all documented, was the perfect storm at the time to make something
Oh,
like
for sure. Yeah, totally. And I think it was the first time I'd seen anyone do that sort of stuff on that scale with that sort of transparency of here's how we did it. This is everything that we did. This is something that you could probably do yourself if you had, the kind of support.
you know, in retrospect, now it's funny because as you learn how complicated things can get, that project in retrospect now just feels quite easy because so the cormorant fisherman that you were mentioning earlier is actually a project that so that one was born because they had seen this underwater project and they're like, okay, what would you do and how would you make it even crazier? And so then we
Yeah.
went on to build an underwater set. And so building an underwater set and trying to figure out how to sink something so that it doesn't capsize or shoot to the surface and is balanced and or like pull the people down is like super super challenging because you're in like a wild environment. And similarly with like the shark shepherd, you have a shark swimming around. So now how do you do this when there's a complete like you're dependent on another creature coming into the shot at the right time? It's not just about the model looking good anymore. And so it's like with every piece that has been added on, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a lot easier than I thought in retrospect to how complicated things can become.
Yeah. And do you think that things, as you've gotten through those kind of projects, they've gotten bigger and bigger, but it also seems like you've had a bigger and bigger crew and support team as well. How has that kind of affected your kind of workflow? Were you a natural person to sort of lead a bunch of people, or was that something you had to learn as well?
Well, so with bigger crews, the work actually gets easier. Like specifically when you get hired on a project, you
Yeah.
usually have like a production team or a producer that can help you do a lot of the work. You suddenly have budget to afford experts and you're not kind of cutting corners to make things happen. And then on
Hmm.
the flip side, you spend a lot more time in meetings. So you do a lot more planning, a lot more safety, a lot more double thinking and triple thinking about everything. And so it really depends on what you like doing. On my end, I'm always outcome focused. So I don't really care how we get there as long as we get there. I really don't like it when you have to spend a lot of time doing something that's completely useless. However, if everything is going in service of making the project the best it possibly can be, I'm super excited to do that. So I think I love the problem solving aspect of it. And I love being surrounded by people that are smarter than me. And I love people who have the right attitude of wanting to go ahead and that, nothing's really quite a barrier. They're just problems that need to be solved. And when I'm with
Yeah.
those kinds of people, I'm quite happy.
Yeah. And that I think is what I was saying before is like kind of feeling like you belong in those group of people. I think for me, it took me a little while to kind of go, actually, I can work with these people and kind of lead these people to the vision that I've been, given to kind of to create. I think it took me a little while to kind of go, yeah, okay, I feel comfortable here. It took a little bit to did that imposter syndrome of, oh, maybe they're going to find out that I'm not as good as they think I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think I'm always trying to sell a really big vision, and I'm not always sure I know that I can execute it.
Yeah.
But I'm still selling the big vision because if it's small, then it's not worth doing. If I've done it before, it's not really worth doing either. So I think although it's really stressful, I'm always doing it anyways.
Right. Is that where the joy of it is for you? Like, I know you said you love the problem solving, but do you love that kind of seat of your pants? I have this idea, now let's try and make it work kind of feeling?
I think I just really love launching things. I love being able to say I did something that I just haven't done before, and this is what came out of it, and
Yeah.
it worked or it didn't work. Like I don't know. I there's the competing sides, right? Like so on the creative side, I really love trying new things, and then there's on the impact side, you really just want to do the most effective thing that will serve the cause. And so I think there's just a little bit of a paradox between those two spaces that need to be held, but I'm definitely playing with both of them.
Yeah. So how much time do you spend in pre-production? Is that, in terms of what we're seeing coming out the other end, is the bulk of the work at the beginning there?
Yeah, I think there's probably 6 to 9 months of work before anything ever gets
Yeah.
done. It's
Yeah.
just so much conversations and so many projects that never see the light of day. So many ideas that were started that were just never finished.
And are you doing those in parallel? Are you doing working on more than one thing at a time, kind of hedging your bets to see which one's going to make it through?
I used to do a lot more in parallel, and then over time I realized like my projects have gotten really expensive as they've gotten really bigger, and as they, especially if they have the experiential component to them, and I just can't afford to self-fund a bunch of this stuff. So,
Yeah.
and I just don't feel happy doing things for free anymore because like great, everyone's willing to pay for materials or costs, but then how does that ever become sustainable for anyone else? And I think I have this interesting thing where I have a portfolio already. So I have a really nice portfolio. The problem I have with my portfolio is actually figuring out how to make it more effective and show less things. And so this I'm always interested in working with someone who will enable something to happen that couldn't be done prior. But but the ultimate goal for me, regardless of the medium, is to work with someone who can make the most use of me as possible. Like I want to be the most useful version of myself within the campaign. I want to provide a unique solution to a problem that they couldn't figure out. And I think if you can find the people for which you can be that perfect solution, that's sort of the dream within the impact space.
Because you then become the tool that they can use to make the change in the world that they're wanting to do.
Yeah, and you're doing the best part. So like you don't want people to come to you because they're like, "Oh, if I hire Ben, everything's going to work." Because that's not realistic. Then they're hiring you because they think you're going to make things go viral and then you're going to generate millions of dollars of sales or whatever it is, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not how it actually works. How it actually works is like, "Oh, we have this amazing campaign strategy. We have all our sales funnels set up. We have all the right people in place. We just need to bring on the right creative in order to like unlock the potential of this campaign. Who could that possibly be?" Like that's the kind of framework that you want. Like that's the dream job scenario. And I think it's really hard to find those because everyone is always looking for like the quick fix, the easy fix. Or maybe it's just the problem that I have with my storytelling. So I'm always telling stories of how, volunteers come together to make things happen. And so it just feels easy because it's meant to feel easy, but that's just a story that's being told. So I don't know. I may be a victim of my own storytelling too, in some ways.
Right. I think we all become victims of our own kind of creative process as well, I think. But have you
Yeah.
found those partners to work with, those ones that you fit together well with?
I mean, I think so. I mean, they come and they go. One of the struggles that I have is that most of the time I'm a little bit of a, people want to work with me because I am the guy who will do the thing that's never been done before. And so
Yeah.
they try to get the weird thing. And once they've had it or seen it or tried it, then it's been done already. So
Does that work into your kind of worldview and your kind of career plan to be that guy who comes in, does that one awesome thing and then moves on to the next thing?
I mean, I don't know if there's a career plan to it. I know from a personal perspective, I really do love doing the really crazy one-off things. I just really want to find a way to make sure that what I'm doing is the best use of time, resources, and energy for the cause that it's trying to help or impact. And
Yeah.
I haven't really done anything that doesn't have an impact angle to it almost 3.5 years now. So 4 years. And even now, like the way I'm thinking about my projects, they all have some kind of an impact component to it. They always have to have some kind of giving back. It's not just about creating for me anymore.
So I think that's how you've evolved, because it's interesting for me seeing how you've come from the guy who would just do crazy pretty pictures to the guy who now does crazy meaningful, world changing kind of installation art. The trajectory of your career has been so awesome to watch that you've just reinvented yourself. So
I think it's so much more fun to just watch me evolve. I actually love watching me and only see the highlight reels. I think it would be a lot more fun of a journey. But like right now, for example, there's a project that I'd really love to do, and it's something that I'm not sure how to go about it because it requires so many partnerships. But I've had this idea of creating an underwater art installation that I wanted to build on a slope that would occupy, I don't know, something like 100 square meters of surface area, and create something that was really large that could double up as a coral garden and an educational setting, so that you can Like, how might you combine ecology, community, and art all at the same time? And I think that's like the kind of like ultimate pinnacle of something that I would like to create right now, but I need to close the gap between what I see in my mind, what's actually possible, where the money is going to come from, and who the partners are going to be. And so finding that balance is extremely tough because I can't just go and create an art installation. I need to find a place where the people need it, where the story fits in, where the art
Yeah.
is actually going to be helpful and not detrimental, where the government or the entity that's there is willing to support it, where the science that validates the need for something like this, and where the community is actually going to be around to support it over time. But like, where do you start for something like that? So like, I have these kind of ideas floating around in my head that I just kind of hold space for, but never quite know or see where, when, how it's going to all end up.
And do you just tend to hold on to these kind of ideas and then the right time it'll just happen? Or do you have to kind of really put some energy behind it to get it to work?
I think because so much of my stuff is collaborative based and I'm ultimately an extrinsically inspired person, I just try to talk to as many people as possible. And the hope is that, you put it out into the universe that this is something you're looking to do, and just maybe you might find the right person to do it. There are so many different collaborations that I'd like to play around with that I haven't had the chance to do yet. For example, I think it would be really interesting to collaborate with an architect that's working on anything along the lines of like regenerative agriculture or regenerative architecture. Like, how might you combine an architectural place-based piece with a community story, and how can art serve to heal or fix something? So I think these are just the kind of questions that are always floating around in my head, but you don't know until you talk to the person. And so much of it is almost like dating.
Yeah. Then you realize you have this thing in common, and then it goes from there.
Exactly.
Do you know Jason DeClares Taylor? He does the underwater sculpture gardens.
No, I don't know him personally. I'm sure I've seen his work.
So he's kind of been at least 10 years building sculpture gardens under the water and creating these kind of artificial reefs. And he did one recently in the Maldives. And usually his stuff is very nice, totally adds to the environment. He's done these sculptures of people, under the water, and the sculptures are based on the local residents. So it's all very kind of nicely kind of thought out. The one he did in the Maldives, it got done. I think a hotel hired him to kind of come in and build this thing. And then once it was done, and they had the big opening and everything, I think maybe 2-3 weeks later, the local heads of the Muslim community came and tore it down because they hadn't been asked or involved in that process. It showed a lot of people with bare heads, which is against their kind of religion, which is totally fair enough. But to have missed someone so important in that culture to get their sign off, I think that's a kind of a pretty big misstep.
You can't come at impact from the savior perspective. It can work, but it generally doesn't. That's what makes it so difficult.
So you have to come at it more from a collaborative, inclusive kind of way.
I think you need to spend a lot of time listening and being to be wrong, and to have your ideas be broken down, and for many people to tell you why it doesn't work, and then for it to occasionally work.
Yeah. I think there's something like in the modern world that I think social media, if it's shown us anything, it's to think about every comment before you even post the thing. Think about all the things that people are going to find wrong with it and prioritize them into, is this something that's going to really change the impact of it? Or is it so small that it doesn't really matter? It's kind of trying to make something airtight.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no right or wrong answer. Like, you can't just be paralyzed by always asking the question, but I think you also have to ask the question simultaneously and be okay with being wrong sometimes, and to learning along the way.
Yeah. My experience with your career was probably, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe longer, where you had kind of come onto the photography scene shooting these very creative conceptual photos, lots of fire breathing, maybe lots of blowing shit up. And it was incredible. Like, your kind of voice it felt like it was there quite quickly. Did it take you long to kind of find your feet, do you think? Or was it kind of a bit of a process that looked faster on the outside?
I think it always looks faster on the outside. and feels a lot slower on the inside. But relative to my peers, I think I definitely figured out the formula, played the game, and rose up the ranks fairly quickly. I think it's less a byproduct of hard work and skill as much as just really good timing. So I
Yeah.
started making behind the scene videos back when very few people were doing it. The only people that were doing it at a higher level were people kind of like Chase Jarvis, so like the super high end photographers. And so for the kind of enthusiast, prosumer photographers that were doing weird, crazy experiments on a budget, there weren't that many of us. And it was at a time where f-stoppers had just gotten born. You know, they were posting one video a month at the time.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, allowed me to get seen pretty quickly and get the social signaling that this is something that was desired. Along the way, I mean, I've always struggled with consistency, but I managed to like create content fairly regularly, at least once a month. At some points it was once a week, but then those generally didn't end up being too sustainable. And it was at a time where Facebook algorithms weren't that brutal. So, you know, when I had 7,000 followers and I had quit my day job, I crowdfunded $12,000 with those 7,000 followers.
Because you had 7,000 eyeballs rather than like 20.
Yeah, because people could actually find your stuff. You know, and I think similarly when I started hitting the trade shows like WPPI and PPE and Photokina and stuff, there were just not that many people doing things that were really weird. And although my work wasn't the best, it was just weird, between lighting people on fire or tying them underwater or using special effects. You know, there was always some big element of production in it. However, it was done in a really approachable way. There were no big production sets. It was just volunteers coming together to do something. So
yeah, it made people feel like they could do it themselves.
exactly. And I was really creating this content to share and inspire others. So it was done in service of this photography community until I got bored.
And so what happened then? Well, when you got bored, what was the answer to that?
Well, I think I generally am always my worst enemy. If I look through my track record, I do something, I get pretty good at it, I figure out the formula, and just right before I should continue and sit on it and really like, you know, throw in all my chips, I'm like, let's go play another game. And so for me, I think the realization was that I didn't just want to create content for photographers. I wanted to create content for a larger audience. And photographers don't hire other photographers. And I wasn't really into doing tutorials and workshops and so forth. And I didn't want that to be my life. And so I kind of pivoted away. I was like, what can I do in order to reach an audience that wasn't just photography? And that created the need to move from photography into more like inspirational, aspirational pieces, which kind of lended itself closer towards commercial photography. And then I did that for a little while. My projects got bigger. I started getting bigger clients. I started earning good money. This one project I did made me earn more money than my entire career combined at the time. That was in 2015 for a cell phone company called Huawei. And I was like, oh, there is serious money here if you find the right people, because you make all your money in global licensing contracts if you can get them. But then once I reached that and I got my, you know, this biggest job of my career, and I was like, well, you know, is that it? Like, you just create crazy photos, they get crazier over time. And then what? You just try to get the next big client to earn more money. And where does it go from there? And it just felt really pointless. So once again, this is the time frame where I almost quit photography. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go into documentary filmmaking. I'm going to go find worthy causes and nonprofits and try to find a way to help them out, because there didn't seem to be a way to combine fantasy and social impact together. But it took me a long time to like figure out what to do there. I realized I didn't love documentary filmmaking. Like, it was just sad being surrounded by people who were sad all the time and who needed help all the time. And
just documenting that rather than helping.
Trying to tell a story. So you document and then you'd create like a fundraising piece to try to help them. But, you know, you were always in this sort of like begging for help position, which wasn't something I was used to, because I quite love this whole massive like aspirational or inspirational angle of like, you can do anything is possible. And so then I went back to photography and I tried to figure out how to combine impact and photography. And then after a year and a half, so 18 months of like unpaid work, I finally got my first paid gig with Nike to do something to highlight their social entrepreneurs. We hung social entrepreneurs on the edge of a rooftop. I did an underwater project that was self-funded, where we tied a model underwater with sharks swimming around for shark conservation. Those started doing really good until I started seeing the trend of like the lowering of value of digital photography. I mean, you couldn't quite make things go viral anymore. And if you did, they didn't last as long because there was so much content saturation out there. And I just started seeing this trend that no matter how great your photography projects became, they just wouldn't, they would just lose value over time. And so I started looking at other markets and being like, oh, how might my skills transpose to other markets on the intersection of art, impact, fantasy? How does it all play in together? Mm-hmm. And that's when I started playing around with installations. So experiential was growing. It all seemed like a great idea. And then now coronavirus. I'm like, oh, okay, good.
If anything's going to derail you, it's going to be a pandemic.
Yeah, that was a little unpredictable, which is fine because in many ways, like you said, I thrive on chaos. But then in between every time I figure things out is just a whole lot of like meandering about trying to figure out like where my place in the world is and how it all fits together.
Yeah, I think people have this kind of idea of someone like you who's, seems quite decisive and has these brilliant ideas that it's, like it's a snap of a finger, and that there's not months of, kind of self-loathing and deliberation and like, what the hell am I doing sort of stuff to get to that light bulb moment.
I think the biggest struggle is that over time, it's become less about just creating something and more about creating something that's actually going to be useful to the world. And when you dive into the impact space, it's a lot more difficult than what you want to do. It's about what do you want to achieve with what you're going to do. And in order to know what you're trying to achieve, you need to really well understand the problem. You need to have the stakeholders. They need to want you on board. You all need to be on the same page. And then we can start talking about production and dollars and everything else. And so what you essentially do when you try to get into the impact space is you add a whole lot of barriers to creation. And that those barriers take place at every single level. So as a tangible example, just because you want to create a project. So what's a good example? So when I was trying to do my shark conservation project and I had the opportunity to go to Fiji and I knew there were sharks there, I didn't have time to think about what impact I wanted to have. I only had the time to think about how am I going to make this happen.
And was this a personal project or was this one that was organized or kind of in collaboration with someone else?
This was a personal project. So basically I was going to Fiji to teach a photography workshop. Yeah. And I figured that while I was there, I might as well do something cool. So I extended my trip for a couple of days. And the whole time I was there teaching, I was actually also in parallel hunting, like, all right, I need to find like a travel agency or someone who can provide me with expertise and diving and lodging and something like that so that I can do the shark project. And somehow miraculously, like a day before the end of the workshop, I managed to find this ecotourism company that was willing and ready to host us with a scientist on like that they were hosting who happened to be studying sharks. And so like all the pieces fell into place. We pulled this shoot together. The model flew herself in from Australia. I flew in a videographer who, worked for free and brought his like underwater red camera, crazy production, Steve Hathaway, who had done a bunch of BBC productions in the past. And we pulled together this project and then I just had this project and I didn't know what to do with it. So I had this amazing series of photographs and there was nothing for me to do with it, because if I had just launched it and just said like, hey guys, we need to care about sharks because they're dying, it wouldn't have accomplished anything. And so I just kind of sat with that project for the longest time. And I started shopping it around to different nonprofits and being like, hey, I did this project. Is there any way you can use this? And so that was sort of like the opposite direction, but it was a really frustrating process because they also they just saw it as a series of images for the most part. And so it took a long time for me to shop around until I found someone. And I found a guy who was in the process of campaigning and was ready to deliver a petition to a minister of tourism in order to create shark sanctuaries. And I was like, oh, why don't I help promote your petition through my project? And so when we launched this campaign, it ended up hitting the front page of Reddit 3 times. It generated over 85,000 petition signatures. And then he now had like a document that he could go and deliver to a person who had the potential to like change some policy. But then I could go on forever, but then you start diving a little bit deeper and then there's a lot of politics involved because change doesn't happen in one snap. Like you can't actually say I did X big, massive change. It's actually, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants. So there are a
Yeah.
lot of people that have been fighting for really long to make certain things happen. And just because you're the tipping point doesn't mean that you claim the credit for it all.
Yeah, for sure.
So
And I
anyways,
think a lot of people will go into that space thinking that they can make a difference straight away by making these images or these great kind of creations. But as your kind of experience shows, it takes a bit.
well, you want to, right? You want to aspire for that, but once again, like to do it properly, you really need to be in the fight. You need to know the right people. You need to know where you fit in. You need to know how it all comes together. Otherwise, it's a lot of wasted time, energy, resources for not very much. And so I think that's where I get really, really bogged down. Yeah.
So how do you feel about those kind of projects now? Was that your kind of first experience of working with like a not profit, like a NGO kind of thing, or?
No, I've worked with different NGOs in the past. I think that was the first time that I had done it in that direction. Over time, the more things I've done that have gotten more attention, the less I feel like attention is that important. So like, sure, I can say I've created content that has over 100 million views for XYZ thing. Like, what have those 100 million views accomplished? And
Yeah.
that's the big question, because when you're in impact, it's not about what you do, it's about what you've changed, right? What has the work you've created accomplished? And if you're not taking responsibility for the change, then you're never going to be able to measure it. And the best
Right.
you can hope for is just like, I've created something really great. And so lately I've been wondering, like, how can I create my projects to be more hyper local? How can I say that as a result of this project, I've changed this community, this school, this neighborhood, this town, this piece of policy or this legislation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then it becomes a lot more tangible on like where you've kind of stepped in, and then that becomes a model for others to emulate along the way.
Yeah.
But then when
So
you
do you?
start playing with hyperlocal, you have all these other problems. Is you don't want to be like the savior swooping in from the outside to like solve something. So you need to find the right stories locally. You need to find the right people to empower, and it's often less about what you want to do and how you can support the local efforts that are already there. And once again, these are all nuances.
Yeah. And do you feel like what you're doing now is more like letting them use your skills to do something for their community as opposed to you coming in and doing something that is sort of centric around you?
I think what I'm trying to do now, the best way to describe it is I'm trying to be more of a guide and less of the hero. Like I'm trying to be
Yeah.
more of the Obi-Wan and less of the Luke Skywalker.
Right.
Yeah, because ultimately, like you want to leave the Luke Skywalker spot to the next generation. You want to find ways to like cleverly support the most compelling story there, and the most compelling story is often the David versus Goliath story. And so, if
Yeah.
you just come in and provide the tools and the expertise and the strategy and maybe some of the visuals, you can really, I think, amplify the message of that person. But once again, that all boils down to relationships and the different partnerships. And so if you get along, if you don't get along, all the things that can go wrong. So it's just like a really process, and it's very slow. It's very tedious. But then when it works, it just feels really great. And it, the Ira Glass thing about the gap.
Not overly.
It's this amazing thing for designers and creatives, but it talks about how like you have, when you get out of school or something, you might have great taste, but you have like this inability to execute what you see in your mind. And so there's this gap. And you spend like the majority of your career trying to close the gap between what you know to be really great and what you can actually do. And so and what differentiates someone who's a good artist from someone who's maybe less good is like how great their taste is in something, right? Because you can't get better at something if you think it's already great. You can only get better if you think it can be improved. And so I think for me, it's this continuous gap. Like every time I think I figure something out, the gap stays the same, and it just kind of shuffles a little further. So I might get a little bit better, but this gap just continuously moves with me. And I never quite seem to be able to close the gap between what I'd really love to be doing and where I currently am.
Do you think that anyone ever does close that gap?
I think it probably fluctuates a little bit between people.
Yeah.
I think it all depends, right? So you can close the gap when the world under which you live stays consistent. So to become an expert at something, the environment needs to stay the same. So the reason you can become an expert photographer is because the rules of physics never change.
Yeah.
Cameras might improve marginally, but then ultimately the rules of physics generally stay the same. So once you've mastered composition, ISO, shutter speed, da 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 da, so on and so forth, you can become an expert photographer. But I think when what you want to master rely on something a lot more squishy. So for example, even if we just take it one step further and say, let's say you want to be an expert marketer. To become an expert marketer, you need to be an expert at all the platforms that you're marketing on. But if the platforms are constantly changing, how can you ever become an expert at it? You can only have a series of best practices and past experiences and to try to stay as updated as you possibly can. So you can be at the forefront of, but you can never truly master it because it's all
Right.
changing. Just when you think
Yeah.
you figured it all out, it's going to change. And so there are certain industries and there are certain fields and there are certain approaches that make it particularly hard to become really great at something. And I think particularly between impact and marketing and storytelling, which are like three very squishy notions, that gap is really, really wide.
Yeah. And I think it's that sort of thing where you can probably close the gap by becoming better at closing the gap. Like it's almost a skill in itself.
Probably, yeah. I think maybe the best way to close a gap faster is to work with more people who are experts at different verticals, right? So then if
Yeah.
instead of trying to be an expert at three things simultaneously, you can just be an expert at one and become really good at it, but then work with the other two to like as a team improve quicker. And it's
Yeah.
something that I haven't done well over my career is build a team because I'm so transient and I keep changing my mind about different things. I have a very fluid, I think, business model. And so one of the analogies that I like to kind of use is like as a storyteller, you're really great at like the peak moments, right? Like you're really good at showing off. So let's say you're on a trampoline. If you're a good storyteller, you can jump really high. I mean, the floor stays the same, but like you have one big burst of energy and you're like super flashy, and then you're back down. And so you
Yeah.
might be able to like jump higher and higher and higher as you get to become a better marketer. But your like physical cap ultimately never increases because the height of the trampoline is still at the same place. And so what might make more sense, so people who are less good at marketing, who are just focused a lot on the foundational back end work, are just building stairs. So it's not as sexy. There's no like big flashy campaigns. It never looks really great, but like they're just building up all these different like blocks and they're just
Yeah.
slowly climbing the stairs. And then at some point you look back and they have like 50 employees now and they're like doing this thing. Okay, the whole structure can collapse. Sometimes there's like, say, an earthquake or whatever. But ultimately, like what I've done is just I've been really great at telling stories. And so I've been constantly pushing the bar higher, the higher I've jumped, but I've never managed to like raise the level of the floor. And so
Right.
that is something that I consider to like, I don't know if it's a weakness. It's enabled me to do a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have been able to do if I had taken the more strategic approach. But it's something that I'm looking at and I'm like, how might I find ways to move my floor up?
Right. And how would you do that? What are those techniques to bring the floor up?
Well, like I said, I think maybe it's just about joining forces with different people, right?
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
two, then that floor goes higher. Because if I could take what I do with is like this power of bringing people together and executing big major projects together, and I could team up with somebody who would be really great at the business side of it, or maybe really great on the campaigning side of it, then suddenly that floor could like rise up. Now the question is, how do you keep that sustainable so that you can continue working together and not just make it a one-time thing?
Yeah. I think there is a inherent problem in a lot of us, not just photographers, but people who tend to work, solo, that we tend to try and take everything on ourselves and try. And as you say, we're trying to do that jump as high as we can, but it's so exhausting. But we kind of forget that there are other people out there who will want to get interested and want to get involved in what we're doing, who can lift us all up. It's that the high tide rises all boats. It's that being able to let other people be involved in it that I think is quite hard for a lot of people.
Well, I think it's sometimes it's not like necessarily control, right? Like you also need to have a very clear vision of what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
So
I mean, even if it's not control, maybe it's a self-confidence of, oh, I don't know if I can explain to these people what I want. Why would they even listen to me?
I feel like the biggest thing, the easiest way to get in is coming up with a business model, a way to hire people, right? If you're not able to provide people with work inspiration will only last for so long. And
Yeah.
the novelty of being involved in something fades too. So it's coming up with like, how do you make this sustainable for everyone involved in the project?
And do you think you've found answers for that question?
No, it is the thing that I've been holding space for. I mean,
Yeah.
I was in a mode right now where I divided my business model into three segments. I was doing consulting, so helping people design campaigns, different companies who were interested in creating something compelling, but didn't quite know how or wanted additional external input. And then
Yeah.
there was the speaking engagements that I was doing, and then there were the actual big projects. But along the way, what I was starting to do was to make sure that anytime I wanted to work with someone, that I'd always like pad the budget so that I could actually hire out other people. One of the mistakes I think I made in my career for too long is that, I've been really great at finding volunteers to come and help out on things, but I never found a way to like get anyone paid. And so all like the best volunteers can still only work for so long because there's no career in it. And
Yeah.
so I've been trying to design those like financial pipelines to just ensure that, if I wanted to work with someone, I could just pay them a little bit of money and then they would come work with me. Great. Win-win for everybody. And if me, who theoretically is on the top of the food chain, isn't creating the business streams so that I can pay others, then I'm just perpetuating the system of like expecting free work down the line. So yeah, that's something that I've been working on myself.
Who are you looking towards to be inspired by? Are there people that you look at that kind of keep pushing you to kind of push your boundaries?
I find it really difficult to follow role models in that I think people are just complicated and they do all sorts of things. I have periodic momentary crushes on people and then I just move on. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of why the podcast format is sort of interesting. It allows you to like dive really deep into someone's life and then be fascinated by everything that they do. And then just like, okay, thanks. And then you just go on to the next person and you're like, all right, tell me what's going to happen in your life. And so I think I do a lot more of the dive in, dive out, as opposed to the just really follow someone all the time. And
Yeah.
I think it's really hard for me to say like who I wish I was. I don't think I would make a better me than myself. So I just try to be the best version of me. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I could always do more. I can always try to be better, but there's no one like I feel like is my person where I can be like, oh, wow, they're who I wish I was, or I wish I could do something like that. It's more like
Right.
that person is really interesting. What can I learn from them? Or how can I integrate elements of what they do into my life? And I can be extremely happy for someone to be way more successful than I am. Like it's not so much about that. I think
Yeah.
my frustration is very internally focused. So I'm frustrated by my own inability to figure out how I can be the most effective version of myself. Or like I am disappointed in the fact that I am struggling to find opportunity in a time where opportunity is everywhere. You know what I mean? Like it has nothing to do with, oh, that person is doing that. I wish I could be that person.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, for me, and maybe you bring up an interesting point, is that when someone says, "Oh, who are you inspired by?" I don't think about the people that I want to be. I think about the people that I look at and go, "Well, they've done that really well. I would like to be doing that thing like them." So instead of it for me being a whole person that inspires me, it's usually just little parts of them. So
Yeah.
I tend to take little skills and little tidbits from them, but they're inspiring in the way that they've actually caught my eye.
Yeah, I think I'm inspired by people who are just truly passionate about what they do. Like I
Mm,
like being surrounded by people who believe, like who just hold like 110% belief in what they do and why they do it. And like, it's one of the reasons why I feel a little bit uncomfortable calling myself an environmentalist, because I know people who are way, way, way more environmentalists than I am, like, who will sacrifice entire like lifestyle, career, job, relationships in order to do what they believe is right and to have such strong moral conviction. And
yeah.
that sort of clarity of purpose is something that I always admire, occasionally even in those that I disagree with, right?
Oh,
Just
totally.
because yeah, sometimes it's not about like it's having that clarity of a vision, purpose, and then being able to back it up by the hard work. And so whether that happens in the entrepreneurial sector, in the nonprofit sector, in the environmental sector, like or in the artist sector, I think there is just general admiration for someone who has a belief and is willing to do the work in order to stand up for it and to make what they at their core stand for become
Yeah.
true.
Even if you don't particularly believe in it or agree with that, it's their method and the energy and their conviction that's admirable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just admire that. I don't think it's me because I'm always second guessing everything. I live in a place of gray and confusion, and I think that's kind of how I end up with really weird, cool things sometimes is because of that confusion and that constant stream of questioning. But I do wish I had a little bit more of the conviction side of things.
I think we all wish we had something else, I think,
Yeah.
Ben, it's been amazing. This has been such a great chat. And it's been nice to kind of push through, you've touched on underwater in your career, but I think everything that you've learnt in your career relates to any kind of creative outlet. So it's been really good.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with your podcast. I think it's great that you're doing it.
Yeah, thanks, man, and you too with yours. I'll post a link to your one in our show notes.
All right.
Thanks, Ben. I'll chat to you soon.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe. If you'd like to connect with us or just learn more about my guests, you can hit our website at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram or Facebook. Also check out our regular live streams on YouTube. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to know more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring, you can find me at brettstanley.com. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.